Sikkim 365 and Baylor Plus have teamed up to bring Baylor fans the ultimate content bundle. You can sign up now for $17.99 a month, a $5 monthly savings, and get instant access to all premium content on both websites. For more information, visit either sikkim365.com or baylorplus.com today. What's up, Baylor family? Welcome to Inside Baylor Sports, the official daily podcast of Baylor Athletics. It's Wednesday, October 23rd, and it's time for our weekly visit with Baylor Director of Sports Journalism, Jerry Hill, to discuss the latest happenings in Baylor athletics. Jerry, since our last episode, Baylor Volleyball defeated Cincinnati 3-0. Baylor Soccer had a tough match with BYU where they led that game 3-1 and then gave up 2 goals in the final minutes to end in a tie, and then ultimately dropped another match on the road to Utah. But then the big story of the weekend was Baylor Football putting it all together and getting a big victory over Texas Tech. So I know we want to talk a lot about football, but I think we need to start with let's start with the volleyball week. Just the one game, 3-0 over Cincinnati, getting back on track. I mean, it's just got to kind of be like, okay, we got that one under our belt. Now let's move forward after the rough week that we had.
Yeah, because it was. I mean, you're sitting there with a 3-game losing streak, and you're just trying to kind of get back on track, and they were able to do that against Cincinnati. And I thought it was important, honestly, Cole, that they were able to do it in 3 and kind of get out of there, and had a pretty clean match. So that was big. And then got a break, obviously, this weekend. This weekend was kind of their bye, and then they go to Houston tonight. And then they'll wrap up the week with Friday against TCU, which obviously you want to get back. You want to kind of a revenge match there. You lost 3-1 up in Fort Worth, so you'd kind of like to get that one back. But I mean, they're sitting there at 3-3 in conference, still ranked at number 23. So still have some work to do, but I think that was big just to kind of get back on the winning streak.
Yeah, you look at the Big 12 now, and there's not a team that's just really separating for the most part. I think there's a lot of season to be played. Now it's about getting back on track and figuring out how to get those wins. And even with all of the losses that you kind of piled up there pretty quick, they're still at 3-3, and everything's in front of them. So that's a good sign. And as you mentioned, they will face Houston in Houston tonight, which will be Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Central Time. Big match there before getting back and facing TCU this weekend. And so let's talk about the soccer team. I mean, we talked about it last week. Like you go there, you feel like they're 2 winnable games, but the BYU game, you're on your way to winning. I'm sure there wasn't even a thought about you need to play well to close out this game, but you're up 3-1 with 6 minutes to go roughly, and then you drop it. I mean, it was kind of devastating fashion the way that it ended. So what about that game was the most disappointing?
Yeah, I think just like you said, you just weren't able to finish because, BYU, they are really good on their home field. They hardly ever lose there. But, when you're up 3-1, you're thinking, I don't know they didn't relax or anything, but I will give BYU credit that they just kept, attacking, kept being aggressive. And that's why they were able to get that second goal to get it to 3-2. Right. And then, handball in the penalty box. That's a tough way to give up that tying goal. Penalty kick. The goalkeeper just got to guess. She guessed one way and the girl kicked it the other way. So it was 3-3. And at that point, you're just trying to, we can't give up another one. And they didn't. So walked away there with a 3-3 tie. That was tough because, you were that close. I know we've talked a little bit about the standings and the points. You get 3 points for a win, 1 point for a tie. And, if they could have wound up with those 3 points, they would, be certainly locked in or kind of locked into the Big 12 tournament and certainly help their NCAA tournament resume. But that and then to, finish out the road trip with a 2-0 loss at Utah, just didn't play well, I didn't think, in that match. They looked slow. And I don't know if that was, took a lot out of them, on Thursday to tie that game. And then, I don't know, they just looked slow. They looked tired on Sunday, and Utah came away with a 2-0 win. And that really hurt because, Utah was behind you in RPI. BYU was ahead of you. And this, the BYU one was a big one to try to get to get a good, tournament resume builder. But then, losing to Utah, you just can't do that. I know it was on the road, and that's a tough place to play. But that was one that, I think now, honestly, Colt, they're to the point where you got to get in the Big 12 tournament to begin with. Then I think they've pretty much got to win the Big 12 tournament to get into the NCAA. So kind of put some, backs against the wall. You need to win Friday just to assure you're in the Big 12 tournament. You're playing Iowa State. Their RPI is in the 200s. Mm-hmm. So that's one you should and you kind of have to win. I think there's ways that they can get in regardless, but you want to kind of take that out of anybody else's hands. You can earn your way into the Big 12 tournament and then see what you can do when you get there.
Yeah, so pretty frustrating, obviously, close this season right now, because you look at the ties that they have in the league and how close they were to potentially winning those games, right, and how many points they received for winning those games versus a tie. The strong non-conference slate that they played, getting the win over Texas A&M. And so it's like everything built to that moment, and then obviously you struggled to close. And yeah, you hope they rally, obviously, for the Big 12 right tournament and get make some momentum there. But obviously it looks like an uphill climb to the NCAA tournament at this point. So they will finish up the regular season. Soccer will in Ames against Iowa State on Friday at 6 p.m. Central Time, then head into the Big 12 tournament. So they need that win in Ames. And obviously, I'm not a big soccer guy, but it's entertaining, at least for me. But I think you still have to be impressed with the direction of the program. I mean, they're battling, and you have games that they're almost growing pains, right? Like we talk about it with football and basketball, et cetera. Like if you continue to chip away, you continue to grind, and these seasons eventually going to get better. The things are going to fall in place. So you hope for their sake going into next season that they'll be ready and taking a next step forward. And not that the season's over by any means. There's still something to play for. But it's kind of the growth of the program getting back to where it needs to be.
Yeah, and I think like you said, if they can just get in the Big 12 tournament, that's a good step in the right direction, and then maybe win a game or two there. Because I think they've shown that they can be right there with just about anybody. Yeah. TCU's leading the league, and they tied them. So I think they've shown that they can compete with just about anybody. But they have to. Again, they have to take care of business Friday, and let's see where the chips fall after that. But you'd love to get into the Big 12 tournament and do some damage there, and kind of see where you are when the NCAA tournament bids are announced.
Yeah. So on a positive note, and obviously what we want to talk about most today in this episode is the football team. I mean, I don't think it can be overstated how important that victory was, not just because it was a win, right? But it just the potential for this season now opens back up, because getting that road victory, I mean, truthfully, I don't know at this juncture of the season going into that game how many people actually would have picked Baylor to win it, and they weren't favored in the game. I actually noticed, though, leading up to the game, the line closed. It was around 6 and then dropped to 4.5 right before kickoff, which is always an interesting indicator. But that's I mean, kind of set the stage for that game. And truthfully, there might have been a couple moments in that game, Jerry, that I felt like, okay, Tech's gaining some momentum, but each time, I mean, for the first time in a long time, Baylor just took it back. I mean, at the end of the first half, when Tech scores, and then Baylor goes down there and scores with basically no time on the clock, right after the beginning of the second half, Tech, Baylor goes 3 and out, Tech goes and scores, cuts it, and then Baylor immediately answers. And from that point on, Tech had nothing. How impressive was this victory to you for Dave Aranda and Baylor?
Yeah, I think for Dave and really for the program, this was a real signature win, I guess. And like you said, this was a team that needed this. Like, you can't go to 2-5, 0-4. You really needed something. You needed a win. And, I guess what really impressed me, Colt, was how they won. I mean, they just really dominated in all 3 phases. The defense gave up a couple of late touchdowns, but until then, Tech had gained just a little over 300 yards, 21 points. So you really held them down when the game really mattered, when the game was on the line. And then the offense to do what it did. I mean, you had a running game. I was trying to figure out where that was. I mean, Air Force, I guess, was the last time you rushed for over 200 yards, but to rush for 255 yards and Sawyer had just another great game. Career high 5 touchdown passes, 274 yards. And then obviously special teams. I think one of those pivotal moments, was the big punt return.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of turned the game, I guess, in a little bit with Josh Cameron, taking it down inside the 1 yard line, and then you score on the next play. And then you get a, muffed return on the kickoff return after that. So it was just such a huge swing there. And Tech from that point on never really caught up. Like you said, there were those two moments where you were like, oh, are they teetering right now? Because, Tech scored with like 154 to go to make it a 17-14 game. And you felt like, man, all this work, and we're going to go into halftime with a 3-point lead. But the fact that Baylor was able to answer, this was just a textbook 2-minute drive, took off all but I think 4 or 5 seconds. You had all 3 of your timeouts left. You used those, and you score with 5 seconds left to go back up double digits. And then, like you said, there at the start of the third quarter, that didn't go exactly as you planned because you were getting the ball first. You wanted to go down there and score and extend that lead. That didn't happen. You went 3 and out, and Tech came down and scored, but Baylor answered. So, again, to your point, the 2 times when Tech was able to close and kind of make it a game and feel like they had a little bit of momentum going, Baylor answered. And again, when was the last time they did that in a game like this? So it was great to see Colt, and then they go out and score 28 unanswered points and really put the game away. You just got to think this is one of the, and you don't want to, fall on your face this week, but this was one of those where it's like, man, you could really build momentum off of this, because this was not one you just kind of squeaked by or Tech gave it to you or anything like that. Tech only had the 1 turnover. You went out and won it. So I thought that was big.
Yeah, it was. And you look to last year when they won at UCF, and the stark contrast between that game and this game, in a game that Baylor trailed 25 points and made a miraculous comeback to get a victory. That was a fluke, right? Like that was very much like, well, they won, but can it propel them? Maybe. But this game, it's more of, okay, they finally got not a break in their schedule. Tech was still 5-1 and 3-0, and had some of the weaknesses that I don't want to say weaknesses they exposed. I think Tech was probably better run defense wise. I don't think Baylor goes in that game and thinks we're going to run for 255 yards. Tech's not a bad rush defense, statistically at least. This game was not a fluke. And I think that's the most encouraging thing about it as you get to this back half of, you play Oklahoma State, who has had their own struggles. You play West Virginia and TCU, who have had struggles. Kansas, we know where they are in the conference race right now, and the upcoming challenges they have. Houston, even though it's a road game, it could potentially be a home game for Baylor, and Baylor fans will get there. There's so many factors that now you're like, man, this entire season looks to be headed in a potentially different direction. And I know that we had discussed that before this game, but I truthfully don't really understand. I don't want to say don't understand. I think the question has been, where has this been all season? Well, I think it's been visible at times. It's just not consistent. And that's been going back for 2 years. And now Baylor needs to win 2 in a row, Big 12 games. And they haven't won 2 games in a row, no matter of the competition, since the 2022 season when they won 3 in a row. So they went all of 23 without winning back-to-back games, and they haven't won back-to-back games this season. So, I mean, we talked about the Tech game being big. How big could this game potentially be for Baylor in this season to get to 4-4?
Yeah, I think the big deal, Colt, is you don't want to lose that momentum. You had so much momentum coming out of that game. Now you're back to 3-4, and you get that first conference win. You get that first conference win in right at a year. So I think that was huge. But now what do you do with it? Matt Jones said after that game that we found our identity. You hope they did. I think identity is proven over time. So I think, again, they have to go back out and prove it again. They have to, is that the team that they are? Is the team that they are the one that went out and just completely demolished Tech? Or is it the one that's kind of had the ups and downs here early in the year? Let's hope it's this team. I was just so impressed, again, with all 3 phases. And that's what we describe as complementary football. They did that. There were a couple of times, and I said Tech only turned it over once. They technically turned it over twice with the muffed kickoff return too. You scored points on both of those. You scored a touchdown and a field goal. And that, again, is something, Baylor hadn't done a lot of this year is capitalizing on the other team's mistakes. So, yeah, I think you need to go out and, kind of, you're probably not going to dominate the way you did last week, but you're at home. You need to get off to a good start. This is an Oklahoma State team, like you said, that has been reeling, but they were 10 seconds away from knocking off a BYU team that's right now, kind of knocking on the door of the top 10 and probably should be in the top 10 at undefeated. They were right there to beat them. They were up in that game and then lost 38-35 with the touchdown with 10 seconds left. So maybe Oklahoma State kind of put some things together this past week, because really, if you look at those first three conference games, I think they lost another one by 3 points. But in a couple of those games, they were just, kind of whipped.
Yeah.
So maybe they put some things together. Ollie Gordon ran a little better this past week, but not great. He was so dominant. Number one nation's leading rusher last year. And he was I think pretty much the Heisman Trophy favorite coming into this year, or certainly one of the favorites. Yeah. And he just hasn't produced, but maybe this was his game to kind of get back on track. But we'll see. I mean, again, that was one of the things Baylor did well too. Really good run defense. Kind of stifled Tech, which had Taj Brooks had a lot of great games. He still got 125, but if I remember right, Colt, 49 of those yards came on that 1/3 quarter drive. So other than that, he didn't do a lot the rest of the game. So I think that was a sign. You hope that continues, because I thought that was maybe the best tackling game that they have had all year.
Yeah, I think that the linebackers have done a good job tackling this year. The entire team against Texas Tech did a really good job tackling. I mean, you look at the safeties, and I know they changed some things up in what they were doing over the bye week and for these particular games, but the way they've performed defensively, and I know like Colorado and now Texas Tech, not similar in their own rights, but they're not similar. But they want to throw the football and they want to spread you out. Texas Tech obviously has a better rushing attack than Colorado. But both of those games, I felt like Baylor just had control defensively. And I don't know if it's because of the style of offense that those teams run. And obviously Colorado gets, one Hail Mary and then one other just, never going to happen again type play in the first half. But overall, the secondary has done pretty well in coverage. In this game, against Colorado, you give up 14 points with essentially 0 seconds left on the clock. You give up 7 with 0 on the Hail Mary and then 7 in overtime. And then this game, it's 52-21. And Tech goes, call timeout, kicking onside kicks, trying to get those 14 points back, which, you can cringe at that a little bit because you put people into safety risk, right? Everybody's relaxed. That game's over at that juncture, but they score 14 more. Baylor's defense in those games against spread offenses it's just been a different kind of animal. I think they struggled some against the physicality, obviously Utah early, but then Iowa State and BYU. These games are just built a little bit different for Baylor. And I think the way that they had approached the offseason was to defend these teams. And now they had Tech. Now they're getting Oklahoma State, and then they'll have TCU, who all want to do very similar things. Right. I think it's a pretty good matchup defensively for Baylor this week.
Well, and you got to think too, Colt, if you think about it, that's what they practice against pretty much every day now, because Spavital brought in more of that air raid type attack. And that's what the defense sees every day. And that's what they've seen since the spring. That's what they saw, during fall workouts. Not that they weren't working against some other defenses as well, but that's what they've seen every day in practice. So I think that's got to prepare them. And maybe they're not as prepared for the physical, just bully ball that you would face, like maybe against a Utah or a BYU, something like that. But I think this defense is built a little better for, those kind of air raid attacks.
Yeah. So 5 games left. Obviously, Oklahoma State homecoming this weekend. Baylor hasn't won a home Big 12 game since 2022, the Kansas game in 2022.
Right.
For the fans, how big is this game? There's going to be a pretty good – there's always – even when Baylor was really struggling, homecoming crowds can usually pull pretty well. It's a big event. For Baylor to get a win in front of a home crowd, how big is that for the momentum for the rest of the season? Then obviously looking at TCU the next week at home, blackout, night game, it just seems like this game from a fan's perspective could just really turn the page and then ultimately drive them to the rest of the season.
Yeah, and you think back to, in their last home game, it was a very sparse crowd, I thought, particularly from Baylor's perspective. So, you hope that the Tech game, the fans caught attention there, and you'll have some come back that maybe had left. So you hope to have some of them back. You hope to have full crowd from the students. But yeah, you need to have a packed house for a homecoming game, and yeah, I think what a win would do this week is it'll bring them back next week, and I think kind of like homecoming, I think you're going to have crowds for homecoming. I think you're going to have a crowd for TCU game regardless.
Yeah.
But when you're winning, it's going to be that much better, and there'll be more Baylor folks in the crowd. I think that's going to be the case this week, and it'll be the case next week, particularly if you're coming off of a win and facing basically your top rival in TCU.
Yeah. One last thing I want to talk to you about, and I know you'll remember the 2012 football season.
Yeah.
How many parallels have you even thought about that, of how many parallels between that season? I mean, really, after the Texas Tech game, finding a running game. It was about this time of the year in 2012 when Lake Seastrunk just exploded onto the scene. I don't think that Bryson Washington is going to have that type of success that Lake did to close that season, but there's so many similarities in the team in general. It's new quarterback, Sawyer Robertson, new quarterback, Nick Florence. It's finding a running game, coming into their own on defense. There's just so many things that are going into this. And I'm not going to say that it's going to play out the same way, but it kind of sets up in a very similar mold to that season, especially in a year when people just didn't expect much from Baylor. Robert Griffin's gone. Everything's changing, and different leading up points, but very similar as well.
Yeah, and Colt, I'm not sure if you're aware or not, but I do in the huddle deal with Nick Florence every week, and we have discussed that. Like he talks about that year because they started out 3-0, they won their non-conference games. They were 0-4 in conference that year, 3-4, 0-4 in conference. So they were struggling. And then all of a sudden, like you said, I think the defense started getting better, and you developed a running game. This was not all on Nick Florence. I can promise you that.
Yeah.
Because I remember the bowl game. I think he threw like 11 passes, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there is some similarities for sure, because they were 3-4. I think they beat Kansas or something. They went up and played Oklahoma well, lost to them. So they're 4-5, and I think that's maybe when they beat K-State, which had been number 1 in the nation. So. That was a strange season, and then you finish winning your last 4, winning the bowl game, dominating a really good UCLA team in the bowl game, and finish 8-5. So the year after Robert leaves, I think the expectations were really low, and I don't know that anybody saw that kind of finish in this team, and particularly beating a number 1 Kansas State team like they did. So. You'd love to see this team get on that same kind of roll. And we've talked about the schedule, Colt. It's certainly capable. You hate to, I want to get greedy. I think people are thinking, well, now they got a good chance to get to 6-6. Well, yeah, they do, but you'd like to get to 8-4 is what you'd like to do. You'd like to run the table and really build some momentum and kind of keep that momentum going and finish strong and go to a better bowl game. That's what your goal is now, is not just to get to 6. Let's get to 7. Let's get to 8. Win the bowl game. Win 9 games in a season when you were picked to maybe win 4 or 5.
Yeah, and you look at the difference between this schedule and that 2012 schedule, had those comparisons. That 2012 schedule at the end of that year wasn't an easy one. Like they had Oklahoma, they had Kansas State, they had Oklahoma State team at home was the top 25, and obviously UCLA. The way they went on that run was no one saw it coming for the most part. Yeah. You don't want to get greedy, but I think the team, if they can play with those types of expectations, that's going to make them that much better to say, hey, like this is no longer about just figuring out how to get a win. This is no longer about being in games. Now it's the confidence just takes another step. And I had someone ask me, it's like, well, how do they not have an emotional letdown? There's no way that this team's going to go into a game against Oklahoma State and have an emotional letdown. Like, if anything, it's going to drive them further for this particular game. Now, they might not play as well, but I don't think that they go into this week of practice not focused on the next game. Do you?
No, I totally agree, Colt. And I would say what that game gave you was a picture of what it can be. That's the kind of the thing. I know, like I said, I know Matt Jones said we found our identity, and I think it can be their identity. But I think what it did too was it gave you that confidence that you need. It's hard to have confidence when you've lost 3 in a row and the way that they lost some of those games. It's hard to kind of build confidence and have confidence when you lose like that. So I think now they're walking a little higher, they're feeling a little better. But no, I don't expect a letdown at all. I think it showed them what they can be. And I think it gives them the confidence that they can go out and do this every week. They're going to have that 1-0 mentality. And that's what they're going to be talking about. They're not going to be talking about winning the next 5, but they're going to, try to have that 1-0 mentality. Let's go 1-0 this week. But from a fan perspective, from, even from a media perspective, I think now it does. I think you mentioned earlier, I think it opens doors to what they can do the rest of the year. Whereas before you were like, man, can they get to 6? Can they get in a bowl game? No, now you think, well, let's see what bowl game we can get into. Let's see if we can reel off these. It would be a 6-game winning streak to finish the regular season. I think it's doable now just because of how good they looked and how much confidence they gained from that game.
Yeah, after they dropped that BYU game, you kind of said, or I kind of felt, okay, now you got to go steal one on the road. Like that's the next thing. And then if you can steal one, then you finish the season 3 games at home, 2 on the road, 1 against Houston. That could be a home game. Houston's struggling right now. There's a lot of opportunities there.
Right.
So we'll see, man. I think there's something to this. I think even before that, the energy that they played with all season leading up until that game was there. It was never not there. They had those flashes, and then it's all of a sudden it's all there. And now I'll just say, if you don't want to lose 1-possession games, don't play 1-possession games. Right? Like if you're not in 1-possession games, you don't have to worry about it because Baylor has struggled immensely in those 1-possession games. So any final thoughts on this upcoming matchup with Oklahoma State on Saturday?
Yeah, no, I think you hit on it. And going back a week again, like you said, Tech had won 4 one-score games. So you didn't want to get to that position. And I don't think you want to against Oklahoma State either. Now, they've lost some one-score games. They've lost some tough games. They're coming off a really, the game that they had this last week was very similar to the Baylor's game at Colorado. So you wonder kind of where they are mentally after that one. Because I guarantee you they had put a lot into that game and, thought if we can get this one, we can kind of get it back on track. So where are they mentally? And we'll see. I mean, I think this is a game that I still think it's a little bit of a toss-up, but let's see what Oklahoma State comes out with. Are they that team that, at least showed some promise last week, or do they, regress and maybe don't build on that? Does Baylor build on its momentum? And I think they will. I think Baylor builds on that momentum that they built out in Lubbock. And I guess what it did too, Colt, sorry to ramble here a little bit.
No,
but,
you're good.
I think Bryce Cherry from the Trib said this. What it did was it gave them some wiggle room. Before, if you lost that game, it was almost like there is no wiggle room. There's, so now you do have a little bit of a wiggle room, not a lot, but you do have some wiggle room. And I think that will help the rest of the way. Not that you want to use it, but at least you do have a little bit of wiggle room.
Yeah, to go to that Oklahoma State BYU game, I read somewhere, and Grayson mentioned it yesterday, BYU had it was a Friday night game. They had 4 or 5 days of preparation time for that, where Oklahoma State was coming off an off week and had 13 days to prepare for that. Plus, they started a new quarterback who got hurt against BYU. Alan Bowman comes back in. There's so many dynamics. Yeah. And then you throw in the fact the way they lost. So you really do worry about where they are mentally. Think about the Baylor start against BYU after the Colorado game, where they just came out and just looked like they were just soulless, right? Like they almost looked like there was nobody in those bodies that were playing for, the first quarter and a half or so. Yeah. So you're not worried. You're curious about where Oklahoma State is. I mean, they're struggling. Mike Gundy will do everything he can to have them ready, but sometimes it just doesn't work. Right. Oklahoma State hasn't had a losing season since, I believe it was his first season at Oklahoma State since, would that have been 2004, 2003? So it's been a while since Oklahoma State has even had an actual losing regular season, which is really interesting to think about. Yeah. So, Jerry, thanks for your time today. As always, look forward to visiting with you again next week. And Baylor family, thanks all of you for listening. For Jerry Hill, I'm Cole Barber. Have a great Wednesday, and Sick 'em Bears.
Sick 'em Bears.